Hi, everybody. Dr. Ella here with another installment of analytics. And in this segment, we're going to show you just some of the basics of the RStudio interface. Um, so hopefully you have downloaded RStudio following the directions in the previous segment, so you can see it here on my desktop. Let me just double click on that icon and open RStudio up here. So once we have it open, you should be privy to these three different windows that we can see here. This top left window, or really the window on the left half of the screen right now, is currently set on the console window function. And you can see it is the console window here. And the console window is basically where we are going to be observing most of our output from individual calculations. And you can also put the input directly into the console window. For example, if I wanted to do some basic calculations, 1 + 1, hit enter, it returns the end result of that calculation, right? I do 5 × 7, gives me the result of that calculation. So in its base function here, RStudio, it can be leveraged as a calculator. But we're going to do a lot more complex things in RStudio than just this. You'll also notice there are a couple other tabs up here. We're not really going to use these too much in terms of things like the terminal tab or the jobs tab. We won't really use those too much here. The console window is going to be one of our primary things that we are going to be utilizing. And for the most part, the console window is actually going to be in the bottom left part of the screen. So let me show you what I mean by that. So the most of our work we're not actually going to do in the console window, because you'll notice I can only really enter commands one line at a time. Now I can do some more complex things. For example, I can create a variable X, and I'll use that little less than sign and then the dash to make a left arrow. That's what we call the assignment operator in R. That is what this guy is right here in that yellow box. Okay. That guy right there is our assignment operator. And what that little left arrow does is it tells me whatever number I'm going to put to the right of it. Like, for example, let's suppose I put the value 10. Okay, now, the way to read that is the assignment operator is saying, hey, we want you to store that value 10 in this variable that we called X. And if I hit enter, you'll notice there's no output provided like there was in the lines above. The lines above gave me the output from the calculation. Okay, but that is not happening here. Okay, now what did happen? Well, you'll notice once we've assigned X that value, now we got some motion in this top right window that I'd like you to direct your attention to for the moment. So this top right window here contains a few things. First and foremost, we currently have it set on the environment tab here. And what the environment tab does, as you can see below, is it shows us the different variables that we have created. And when we're importing data and we have actual data sets, those will show up in this global environment also. And this is basically a nice way for us to keep track of all the information that we've created in R as we are manipulating it. Okay. If you're getting a little antsy and you want to try to import some data into R, I definitely encourage you to go ahead and do that. There's a very easy way to do it using this graphical user interface button here. You just click that import data button. Okay, and it gives you some options if you know the format of the data that you are going to import. For most cases, the base works really well. If you have any comma separated files, then you would want to use base there. But if you have an Excel formatted file, you can also pull in Excel data fairly easily. And I will show you how to do that in a later segment. But when you do import a data set, that would be a variable that would show up in this global environment region here. Now, I could also create another variable. It's called a Y. We'll store the number 5 in there. And boom, you see that comes up. So now anytime I reference X or Y, R is going to remember that we have assigned information to those particular values up here in our environment. So anytime I reference X, okay, the output R is going to return is going to be 10. Anytime I reference Y, it's going to return a 5. So if we do calculations like X plus Y, which is 15, or X times Y, which is 50, right? X is knowing to keep those values that were assigned associated with those characters X and Y. So those are now my variables. Okay, if I wanted to change those values, I could reassign them. For example, if I want to overwrite X and make it 20 now, I can do that. And note that in the environment window in the top right, the value of X did change to 20. And you can see that here. So again, at its base function, R can be used as a calculator to help facilitate calculations line by line. However, I'm going to recommend that is not really how we want to proceed moving forward. So let me go ahead and clean the screen up a little bit. What I would like to direct your attention to next specifically is the top left portion of the screen here, where you see this little, it looks like a document with a little plus sign. You can access this information by clicking on the File tab and going to New File. It will give you the list of different file types you can create in R. Our main file type is going to be an R script. That's actually going to be the main thing we're going to use in order to write our code and to run that code into the console window. There are other file types like markdowns, which are really useful. In fact, your textbook for the course is written in R Markdown. There are Shiny web app files that you can use to create web applications as well if you're interested in trying to deploy a web app later at some point in time. But if you have other script files like Python or C++, you can pull those in here too as well. Now, if you just click on this down arrow, you'll see we get a similar menu here of the specific files we want to create. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to set up a new R script file. And this is something you're going to have to do as you go through and you are coding and you want to save your code. That's what you're going to be saving it as. You're going to save it as an R script file. And this is also something that I want you to do for every Swirl module you complete for that first set of R programming e-lessons. So we're going to go ahead and start a new script file. And for our purposes, this script file here, which is now showing up in the top left portion of the screen, that is here. In fact, I'm going to use a different color. I will use blue for that. So blue is our script file in this top left window. Okay, notice our console window got shrunk. It is now down in the bottom left corner. Okay, still we have our global environment up in the top right. Okay, and you can also, if you want in the top right as well, you'll notice there are some other tabs. There's a history tab. If you click on that, you can see exactly the history of all of your commands. So if you're doing work and you forgot what you had done or you accidentally cleared something out, should be able to click on that history tab and you can at least recover some semblance of what you had done. And if we have any connections open, if we're linked to a database on the internet, that would show up here on this tab. So that's going to be relevant when we're scraping data a little bit later on in the course. But I usually have the environment tab set there just so I can see kind of in real time as I'm manipulating data, as I am creating new variables and importing new information, how those things are changed and how they're being tracked. You'll notice there is one more window down in the bottom right that I have not really talked about, and it is definitely an important one here. So let's go ahead and discuss that. In the bottom right, we have another window, which functions to actually do quite a few things here. You'll notice there is a Files tab. If you click on that, it'll allow you to go ahead and look at different files in what's called your Active Directory. Anytime we generate plots or visualizations, those will show up in this bottom right window here. And you can resize these windows if you want to make them bigger or smaller, or you want to pull them left or right. You can definitely resize them. So I have this set up according to my preference for how I like to look at these things. I'm going to show you a little bit later how you can pull up help documentation. And anytime you do that, you call a help call, it will put the output of that help call down in the bottom right. So you can see here, the last help call that I put in was related to the structure of a particular data set that's built into R in this package called a ggplot2 package, which I will show you how to install a little bit later on. And if you scroll down, it gives you, some details about whatever that help call was. And when I called help on a particular built-in data set, what it does is it describes the data set for me, and it tells me the format of the data set as well as a description of each of the variables. So that's fairly useful. I want to jump back to the packages tab here. Hey, this is a very easy way to install different open source packages in R. So one thing I'm going to walk you through in a segment coming up is I'm going to show you how to install the swirl lessons. Okay, how to install that and then run the library and then install the individual lessons within that package. So one way you can install the swirl library fairly easily, install the swirl package, and this only needs to be done once. You need to install the package once so it's local on your machine. And then anytime you want to use the package, when you start a new R session, you will use the library command to call the library for that package, so that R is aware that you're gonna call commands from that package. And again, we're going to touch on all that in a later segment. But in the meantime, if you were to click on this install button here, that I will highlight in yellow, if you were to click on this install button, okay, and then what happens is another window pops up and it asks you specifically, okay, well, which packages do you want to install? And if you start typing in the name of the package, if I want to install the swirl package, you'll notice it picks it up pretty easily. And I can just click the install button here. It will install the package. And I always like to leave this checkbox there to make sure it also installs any other packages that this particular package relies on. If you don't click that install dependencies and you're running the package and you're calling commands from that particular library, and those commands rely on other prerequisite packages being installed, you will wind up getting errors or warnings that will force you to install those packages anyway. Okay, so if I was to hit the installation button here, and again, we're going to go through this manually in more detail in a later segment, you'll notice in the console window, a bunch of information starts popping up related to the installation package. Okay, so I'm going to let it install here. Okay, and if you've already installed it and you do it again, not a big deal. It just overwrites those files. Okay, so a lot's going on in that bottom left console window related to installing this swirl package. And it may take a moment depending on the size of what it is you're installing. But you need to be connected to the internet for this to work. If you're not, okay, you're going to get an error that R cannot find the information it's looking for because you don't have an internet connection open. Now, you'll notice down in the console window here, I'm going to scroll up and down a little bit. There's some information showing up in red, other information is showing up in black. And the thing I would like to direct your attention to momentarily here are the following. So when I ran that, you'll notice the first thing that popped up in red here is a warning sign. It gives me a warning. Now, a warning, I want to be clear, is different than an error. You may get warnings, but warnings will not prevent things from running in R. Okay, warnings are okay. There may be some things we have to be cautious about, but warnings are trying to preemptively let us know, hey, there might be something weird about what you're doing. And I want to be clear, this is different than an error. An error will occur if you put in some syntax and you try to run it and that syntax is not valid. Okay. For example, if I try to reference a variable that I have not defined yet, I may wind up generating some type of error. Now, the other thing you'll notice is the console window is a little cluttered in the bottom left there. So if you want to clear the console window, okay, you can do that always by pressing or typing rather the following. Okay, if you use Control and L together, okay, this will clear the console window. And again, that console window, I'm specifically talking about this window down here. So let me go ahead and clear that up, and then we'll look at an error message here. Let me Control L, Boom, console window is all nice and clean. Okay, again, if you forgot what you did, no problem. I can go back to this history tab up in the top right here. Okay, we can click on that history tab, and I can still see all of the commands that I had put in here, even some from a previous R session that are still showing up in a fresh one. So I think we started right around here. 1 + 1 is where I started today. Now we've created a few variables. I got X and Y. We saw that if I call X and Y, right, R returns the output with those values. But if I was to, let's say by mistake, I try to call Z, then boom, I immediately get an error message here. And that error message tells me the nature of the mistake that I've made. It's like, oh, you're looking for some information in Z, but we don't have anything called Z yet. You didn't define it. So an error happens when I put in some syntax and try to run it. And that syntax is not correct, or it's making a reference that is not appropriate. Now, I was mentioning before that we don't really want to do our work in the console window. Okay? And where we actually want to do our work is in this top left window. And the top left window, this R script file, it basically is going to function for us very similar to a text editor, like a word processor. That is where you are going to be putting all of your code in the top left. Okay, so if I wanted to, for example, write the same code, I want to take a number X and I want to store in it the value 20, okay, I can write that up there. Okay, now, how do I run that code? Okay, well, to run the code is pretty easy. Okay, all we're going to do, and let me write this down here in slightly smaller font. So to run code, we're going to use Control and Enter. And if, by the way, if you're using a Mac, you may have to use Command, I believe, instead of Control, but just double check that. Okay. So the way I'm going to run that line of code is I'm going to put my cursor, my blinking cursor, up on that line. So I can see up the cursor somewhere on that line. You can even highlight it if you want, but all you need is the cursor to be on that line. And I'm going to hit Control Enter. And what you're going to notice is that very, very quickly, almost instantaneously, what R is going to do, or rather RStudio, it's going to take this line, it's going to copy it, it's going to paste it down in the console, and it's going to run it for me. So instead of me having to write it up top and then re-enter it down in the bottom, okay, by using Control Enter on that line, we should see that it's a little bit easier to run code directly from a script file than it is to try to run code line by line down in the console window. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to run that line of code. In fact, let's go ahead and make a new variable. Let's call it Z. And let's store something in Z. Let's store X + Y. And let's go ahead and do that. And I want you to think about what we're actually storing in Z there. Okay, what value should be stored if we're storing X + Y. So when I run this line here, right, what do you expect to happen? Well, it's going to create a new variable Z. Okay, and notice what it's stored in Z. Stored the value 25, which I think we're good on. Okay, but I want to be clear, if I change X or I change Y, like let's suppose I reassign X the value 1. Okay, notice when I call Z again, and I'm hitting Control Enter now to run these lines, so you'll notice a real quick copy paste happening, right? And the results of that real quick copy paste are showing up down in the console window here, right? It's me reassigning X the value of 1 and me calling Z after assigning it the value of X + Y, which previously was 25. But note now when I call Z, it doesn't automatically update that variable when I've overwritten one of the previous ones that it was referenced. Okay, and you're going to find a lot of these quirks as you work through with trial and error and you experiment yourself. So this is the basics of how RStudio operates, right? You got these 4 windows. Most of the work is going to be done in the top left in this, this text editor, where again, we're using Command Enter or Control Enter on a particular line of code to run it. And if you were to highlight multiple lines of code, you can hit Control Enter, and that is the big advantage of running code from the text editor in the top left window, is that you can run multiple lines at the same time with that copy paste, which is a lot less cumbersome than trying to put those lines in and run them directly down in that console window in the bottom left corner. So one other thing I would like to mention, and this is actually super important moving forward, but it is a great practice and a good habit to get into, to start commenting your code as you write it. So the way we can make a comment in an R script file, is we use the pound sign. And you'll notice right away when I put the pound sign in, the text turned green. And anything I write after the pound sign, the computer will ignore when I run that line of code. So the text in green here will not actually do anything if you run that whole line of code. It will ignore anything after that green pound sign, after the hashtag or whatever you want to call it. Whatever shows up to the right of it will be green, and that will be a comment. Now, it's important as you're writing code, and you'll notice I do this very meticulously. Pretty much every line of code, when I do something, I have a comment either above, below, or in the same line explaining what that syntax does, okay? And this is a really important habit to be in because as I've mentioned several times, and I will throughout the course, analytics is a team sport fundamentally. At least you have to be geared towards that. In that other people may be using your code at some point. And if you do not have it commented and you are not coding clearly, you're not spacing things out right, you're not indenting, it can be extremely messy for someone to work through. So you should code as if the person reading your code is some sort of psychotic murderer, right? You don't want to upset them. So you want to code very, very clearly. You are giving a set of instructions to the computer. Computer needs to clearly understand the syntax, but more importantly, other people need to understand what it is you are doing in that code when they're looking at it. Okay, so again, comments are not run, but it is nice to know what's happening on a given line. So on this line, we are calling the value of the variable z. Okay, that is what's happening on line 3 there. Okay. Now, there are a lot of other types of built-in functions in R. We don't have time to go through every single one of those. So again, try to be upfront. There's a lot of exploratory, what we call hacking, that you guys need to be proactive about in this course, messing around in RStudio, trial and error, trying to do things like import data and play around, even though maybe we haven't gotten that far yet in the course. But it's really important that you are exploratory with our analytics tools, and that you're willing to push forward, even though maybe we haven't covered certain elements that you might be interested in. So I definitely encourage you to mess around with this software. It's great software. It can do quite a bit. And for our purposes in this course, it is really an excellent tool for us to be using in terms of data analytics. So I think that is all I really want to cover in this brief segment here, kind of introducing you to RStudio and the RStudio interface. One thing I do want to mention is once you're done with your script file, it is time to save it. So you see here, there's this save icon. You can also go File, Save As, and then you can pick where locally on your computer you would want to save that script file. But I'm going to have you create a script file to track your work for every one of those 15 swirl modules. Okay. So as you're doing the swirl exercises, and again, I'll go through this in more detail in a later segment, every line that you're going to have to put in the console, I'm going to have you write in the R script file in the top left. That way, when you're done with the exercise, Okay, you're going to copy all your work from that script file and you're going to include that in the email that you have sent to me. Okay. That way, when you're done with those 15 exercises, you will have 15 script files that you can reference for all the work that you did as you worked through those exercises. So we're going to pick up with another segment moving forward, really focusing on how do we install the swirl package. Okay, I kind of showed you that today, how we install that swirl package manually using the GUI, the graphical user interface. We just push that button. That's what we mean, by the way, when we say GUI, graphical user interface. It's a button that you can push on the screen. There's no code you have to write. In the later segment, I'm going to show you how to take the code chunk that I've provided to you, and I'm going to show you how we can actually run lines of code to also do the package install. So in RStudio, there's more than one way to skin the proverbial cat. Hopefully no animal activists get too offended if I use that analogy or that idiom. The way that I show you to do something, I'm sure there are many alternative ways to achieve the same goal. So I'm giving you, my preferences based off of my experience and my perspective using this tool. But I do encourage you guys to go look at Stack Overflow, look at other people's code, look at other people's projects, and be flexible in trying to assimilate other techniques that maybe I don't explicitly show you. I might not do something the most efficient way if my goal is to explain something clearly, right? I might do it in a longer, simpler way, and there might be more efficient code out there that maybe is, runs faster, doesn't take as many lines, gets the same job done, but doesn't do it in as intuitive of a methodological approach as I might. So sometimes my technique might differ from other people's techniques. It might not be as efficient, but if it isn't, I will aim for clarity. That is typically going to be my approach here, given the sensitive nature of us trying to learn programming and do data analytics in parallel in this course, which I'm aware is definitely a daunting task for most. And I definitely commend you guys for being here. So that will wrap up this segment here. In this segment, we introduced you to the RStudio interface. I showed you how to do things like create a new R script file, how to save it. We looked at the environmental variables in the top right corner, talked a little bit about how to import a data set using that GUI button. We talked about the console window in the bottom left, as well as how to install packages in the bottom right using the graphical user interface. So RStudio, again, this is the integrated development environment, the IDE that sits on top of R, the statistical computing framework. And RStudio is going to be the main tool we're using for this course. So you're not really going to need to open up R. Okay, you're going to need to open up RStudio in order to work. And when you close RStudio typically does something nice. And we'll see if it happens now. But if I hit the close button, okay, it asks me, do you want to save your workspace image? And if I say yes, that means when I go back into R the next time, all the values that I was working with, all the script files I had open, they will show up the same way that I had left it. Okay, so if you want to pick up where you left off, make sure you are saving your workspace image. Otherwise, hope that was an informative segment and stay tuned for more. I will see you later.